One Last Dance. Chapter 1. Return. Alice Hartman had lived in Verona for 10 years. The city had become her quiet refuge after a painful chapter in her life. Once, she had been a rising star in the world of ballet, dancing on grand stages across Europe. Her movements had been graceful, her future bright. But everything changed after a serious injury during a rehearsal in Vienna. Her body could no longer carry the weight of her dreams. The doctors said she might walk again, but dancing professionally was no longer possible. That news had broken something inside her. She returned to Verona, a place she had visited once as a student, and decided to stay. She opened a small dance studio in a quiet street near the river. It was not grand, but it was hers. The studio had wooden floors, large windows, and the scent of old music sheets. She taught children and adults, beginners and dreamers. Her days were filled with soft piano music, slow steps, and gentle corrections. She found peace in the rhythm of teaching, in the quiet joy of helping others move. Alice lived alone in a small apartment above the studio. Her mornings began with tea and stretching, and her evenings ended with books and soft music. She didn't go out much. She didn't seek attention. Her past was something she carried quietly, like a folded letter in her coat pocket. She had loved once, deeply, but that love had faded after her injury. Lucas had been part of her life then, a talented architect with a kind smile and a restless heart. They had met in Paris, danced together in small kitchens, and dreamed of a future full of art and light. But when her world collapsed, he didn't know how to stay. He left, and she never asked him to return. Over time, she stopped expecting him to. One morning, Alice received a letter from the city's cultural committee. They were organizing a charity ball in one of Verona's oldest halls, and they wanted her to choreograph the final performance. It was a formal event, with guests from across Italy and beyond. The theme was Moments of Memory, and they believed her style would fit perfectly. Alice hesitated. She hadn't choreographed for a public event in years. But something inside her stirred. She accepted the invitation and began planning the dance. She chose a piece of music that had once meant something to her, a soft, emotional melody with slow rises and gentle falls. She imagined two dancers moving together, not with perfection, but with feeling. As the date of the ball approached, Alice spent more time in the studio, shaping the choreography, testing movements, and adjusting the flow. She didn't know who the dancers would be yet, but she trusted the process. Then, one afternoon, she received the list of confirmed guests. She scanned the names without much thought, until one stopped her. Lucas Bennett. Her heart paused. She hadn't seen that name in years. He was coming to Verona as part of a restoration project. He would be attending the ball. Alice sat down slowly, the paper still in her hand. She didn't know what to feel. Surprise, fear, curiosity. She had built a life without him, but now the past was walking back into her world. She didn't change her plans. She didn't cancel the performance. But something inside her shifted. The dance she was creating was no longer just a piece for the audience. It was becoming something more, a way to speak without words, a way to face what had been left unsaid. Alice didn't know if Lucas would notice. She didn't know if he would remember. But she knew that this moment, this return, was not just about choreography. It was about memory, healing, and the quiet strength of moving forward. The studio remained filled with music, but now, every note carried a deeper meaning. Alice was preparing for a dance that might be her last with him. And she was ready. Chapter 2. Reunion. Lucas Bennett arrived in Verona on a quiet morning in early spring. The city was waking up slowly, with soft light touching the rooftops and narrow streets. He had come for work, to lead the restoration of a historic building near the old square. As an architect, he had worked on many projects across Europe, but this one felt different. Verona had a charm that was hard to explain. It was a city of stories, of balconies and stone arches, of music and memory. Lucas had not been here in years, and he didn't expect anything unusual. His days were planned around meetings, sketches, and site visits. He was focused, professional, and calm. But beneath that calm, there was a part of him that still carried a quiet ache, something he never spoke about. On the second day of his visit, Lucas was invited to attend a rehearsal for the upcoming charity ball. The event was being held in the restored hall, and the organizers wanted him to see how the space would be used. He entered the building and walked toward the stage, where music was playing softly. Dancers moved across the floor, practicing steps with grace and focus. Then he saw her. Alice Hartman stood near the piano, guiding the dancers with gentle movements. She looked older than he remembered, but her presence was the same, strong, calm, and full of quiet beauty. Lucas stopped walking. His breath caught for a moment. He hadn't known she lived in Verona. He hadn't expected to see her again. The last time they had spoken was years ago, in a hospital hallway, when everything had changed. Alice noticed him too. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the room felt still. She didn't look away. She didn't leave. She simply stood there, watching him with a quiet expression. Lucas felt the past rise between them, not with anger, but with weight. Memories came back. Late-night walks, shared dreams, the sound of her laughter, and the silence that followed her injury. He had left when she needed him most, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to stay. Seeing her now, standing tall and graceful, made him feel both proud and ashamed. He stayed for the rest of the rehearsal, watching from the back, saying nothing. That evening, Lucas walked to her studio. He didn't plan what to say. He just knew he had to go. The door was open, and the lights were low. Alice was alone, cleaning the floor and organizing music sheets. He stepped inside, and she looked up. They didn't speak about the past. There were no questions, no explanations. But the silence between them was full. It was not empty, it was waiting. Lucas felt the tension, the unspoken words, the years that had passed. Alice didn't ask why he had come. Instead, she told him about the final dance she was preparing for the ball. She said it was a duet, and she needed someone to dance with her. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held something deeper. Lucas didn't hesitate. He said yes. The decision surprised him. He hadn't danced in years, not since they had danced together. But something about her invitation felt right. It was not about performance. It was about connection. About facing what had been left behind. Lucas knew the dance would not be easy. It would require trust, rhythm, and emotion. But he also knew it was a chance to speak without words. A chance to be present, truly present, in a moment that mattered. As he left the studio that night, the streets of Verona felt different. The city was still the same, but something inside him had shifted. He was no longer just an architect on a project. He was a man returning to a story he thought was over. And the dance was just beginning. Chapter 3. Rehearsals. The rehearsals began in Alice's studio, where the wooden floors had been worn smooth by years of quiet practice. The space was familiar to her, filled with soft light from the tall windows and the scent of old music sheets stacked on the shelves. Lucas arrived early on the first day, dressed simply, carrying no expectations. He stood near the door for a moment, unsure of where to begin. Alice greeted him with a nod and turned on the music. The melody was slow and emotional, chosen carefully to match the mood of the final performance. As they stepped onto the floor, the silence between them felt heavy. Their movements were precise, shaped by years of training, but there was no warmth yet. They danced like strangers following a map, not like two people who once shared a rhythm. At first, their bodies moved with caution. Alice counted the beats in her head, watching Lucas from the corner of her eye. He followed her lead, but his steps were stiff. She corrected him gently, not with words, but with small gestures. He responded, adjusting his posture, trying to match her flow. The music played again and again, and each time they danced, something shifted. The awkwardness began to fade. Their steps became smoother, their timing more natural. They started to remember, not just the movements, but the feeling of dancing together. The way their bodies used to speak without sound. The way they used to trust each other with every turn and lift. It was not perfect, but it was real. Alice felt old emotions rising inside her. She had buried them deep, under years of silence and routine. But now, with each rehearsal, they returned. She remembered the way Lucas used to look at her during performances, the way his hand fit perfectly in hers. She remembered the dreams they had shared, and the pain that had followed. She didn't speak about it. She didn't ask him to explain. But she saw something in his eyes too, a quiet regret, a softness that hadn't been there before. Lucas began to open up, not with words, but with movement. His steps grew lighter, his focus sharper. He started to match her energy, not just physically, but emotionally. The dance became more than a performance. It became a conversation. They rehearsed every evening, sometimes in silence, sometimes with soft music playing in the background. The studio became a space where time felt different. Outside, the city moved on, but inside, they were building something fragile and beautiful. They didn't talk about why they broke up. They didn't revisit the pain directly. But each step brought them closer. Each movement was a memory, a question, an answer. The dance became a bridge between past and present. It was not about fixing what had been broken. It was about honoring it. About finding peace in motion. Alice watched Lucas carefully. She saw how he tried, how he listened, how he changed. She didn't know what the final dance would mean to him, but she knew what it meant to her. It was not just a performance for the ball. It was a moment of truth. A chance to say goodbye to the past, not with words, but with grace. As the rehearsals continued, the tension between them softened. The music carried them forward, and the studio filled with something quiet and strong. They were not the same people they had been. But for a few minutes each day, they moved as one. And that was enough. Chapter 4. Memories. One evening, Alice stayed late in her studio. The sun had already set, and the soft glow of the streetlights outside gave the room a quiet warmth. The music had stopped, and the dancers had gone home. She sat alone on the floor, surrounded by scattered papers and folded costumes. Her body was tired, but her mind was full. She reached for a box she hadn't opened in years, tucked away behind the piano. Inside were old programs, handwritten notes, and photographs from her past. As she looked through them, her fingers stopped on one picture. It was a photo of her and Lucas, taken during a performance in Paris. They were standing side by side on stage, smiling, their hands still joined from the final pose. They looked young, full of hope, unaware of what life would bring. Alice stared at the photo for a long time. She remembered that night clearly. The music, the lights, the way the audience had stood to applaud. She had felt so alive, so sure of her future. Lucas had kissed her forehead after the curtain closed, and they had walked home under the stars, talking about everything they wanted to do. She had dreamed of dancing forever, of building a life with him filled with art and movement. But everything changed after her injury. The fall had been sudden, the pain sharp, and the recovery slow. The doctors had told her she would never dance professionally again. Her world had stopped, and Lucas had struggled to stay. He had tried at first, but the silence between them grew. He didn't know how to help, and she didn't know how to ask. One day, he left. No fight, no goodbye. Just distance. She didn't blame him. She understood that pain could push people away. But the hurt remained. It lived quietly inside her, like a shadow that never left. She had built a new life, one with purpose and peace, but part of her had never healed. Seeing Lucas again had opened something she thought was closed. Their rehearsals had brought back feelings she had buried. Not just love, but loss, confusion, and the question of what might have been. That night, sitting alone in the studio, she took out a piece of paper and began to write. It was a letter to Lucas, not to send, but to release. She wrote about the dreams they had shared, the pain she had felt, and the silence that had followed. She wrote about forgiveness, not for him, but for herself. She had held on to the past for too long, and now she wanted to let it go. When she finished the letter, she folded it and placed it in the box with the photo. She didn't cry. She didn't feel broken. She felt clear. She knew that the dance they were preparing was not just a performance. It was a moment of closure. A way to say goodbye without words. She didn't expect answers or promises. She didn't want to change the past. But she wanted to honor it. To give it a final step, a final breath, a final dance. If they danced together, it would be their goodbye. And in that goodbye, she hoped to find peace. The studio was quiet as she turned off the lights. The shadows on the walls faded, and the night outside waited. Alice walked home slowly, holding nothing but the memory of a smile and the hope of one last dance. Chapter 5. The Ball Night. The night of the ball arrived with quiet elegance. Verona was calm, wrapped in soft spring air and the glow of street lamps. The grand hall stood in the center of the city, its tall windows lit from within, casting golden light onto the cobblestone square. Inside, the space had been transformed. Candles flickered in tall glass holders, and fresh flowers lined the walls and tables. The scent of roses and lavender filled the room. Guests arrived dressed in formal clothes, their voices low, their steps careful. The atmosphere was warm but respectful, as if everyone knew something special was about to happen. Alice stood backstage, wearing a simple but graceful dress that moved like water when she walked. Her hair was pulled back, and her face was calm. She had prepared for this moment with care, not just as a dancer, but as someone ready to close a chapter. Lucas arrived early and waited in the quiet room beside the stage. He wore a dark suit, clean and classic, and his hands were steady. He had rehearsed the steps many times, but tonight felt different. It was not just about movement. It was about meaning. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't look for Alice. He knew she would come when it was time. When she entered the room, they nodded to each other. No words were needed. The music had already begun in the hall, soft and slow, setting the tone for the evening. The audience sat in silence, watching the stage with quiet attention. The lights dimmed slightly, and the final performance was announced. Alice and Lucas stepped onto the stage together. The floor was smooth, the light gentle. They stood side by side, waiting for the music to begin. When it did, they moved. The dance was slow at first, full of space and breath. Each step was careful, each turn thoughtful. They didn't rush. They let the music guide them. Their bodies spoke in silence, telling a story that words could not hold. The audience watched without sound. It was not just a performance. It was something deeper. A story of love once shared, of pain carried quietly, of forgiveness given without asking. Alice moved with grace, her arms soft and strong. Lucas followed with quiet strength, his steps steady and true. Together, they created something fragile and beautiful. As the dance continued, the emotion grew. Their movements became fuller, more open. They reached for each other, not just with hands, but with memory. The past was there in every step, but it did not control them. It shaped them. It gave the dance its heart. Alice felt her body respond with ease, not like before, but with new strength. Lucas felt the rhythm inside him, not just in his feet, but in his chest. They were not the same people they had been. But for these few minutes, they were connected again. The music rose gently, then softened. The final steps came slowly, like a breath before sleep. They stood still, facing each other, eyes meeting in quiet understanding. The hall remained silent for a moment. Then the applause began. It was loud, full, and warm. But Alice and Lucas didn't hear it. They heard only the quiet between them. The space where words were not needed. The space where the dance had spoken. They bowed together, then walked off the stage. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. The audience had seen the story, and that was enough. Backstage, they stood for a moment, still close, still quiet. Alice smiled gently, and Lucas nodded. There was nothing more to say. The dance had said it all. The ball continued, but they had finished their part. And in that final moment, something had changed. Not just between them, but within them. The past had been honored. The pain had been seen. And the silence had been filled with light. Chapter 6. After. After the ball ended, the grand hall slowly emptied. The music faded, The candles burned low, and the guests began to leave with quiet smiles and soft voices. Outside, the night was calm. The air was cool, and the stars above Verona shone gently. Alice and Lucas stepped out together, walking side by side through the quiet streets. Their steps were slow, not because they were tired, but because they were holding onto the moment. The city around them felt peaceful, as if it understood what had just happened. They didn't speak at first. The silence between them was not heavy anymore. It was soft, like a blanket after a long day. They had danced, and in that dance, they had said everything they needed to say. Alice stopped near a small fountain in the square. The water moved gently, and the light from the street lamps made it sparkle. She looked at Lucas and told him she was moving to Milan. She had been thinking about it for a while. A new studio had offered her a position, and she wanted to start fresh. It was a chance to grow, to teach, and to live in a new rhythm. Lucas listened quietly. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to change her mind. He understood. Milan was not far, but it was far enough to begin again. He looked at her and thanked her for the dance. Not just the one they had shared that night, but all the dances they had shared before. The ones filled with hope, with pain, and with love. Alice smiled. It was a soft smile, full of peace. She said it was their last dance. Not because she was angry, and not because she wanted to forget, but because it was time. Time to let go, time to move forward. Lucas nodded. He didn't feel loss. He felt something else, closure. A quiet ending that didn't hurt. A goodbye that didn't break. He watched her walk away, her steps light and sure. She didn't look back, and he didn't need her to. He stood there for a while, listening to the sound of the fountain, feeling the night around him. The past was still part of him, but it no longer held him. It had been seen, felt, and released. Lucas walked back to his hotel slowly. The streets were empty, and the city was sleeping. He thought about the years that had passed, the choices he had made, and the silence he had carried. He thought about Alice, her strength, her grace, and the way she had danced that night. He didn't feel regret. He felt respect. She had given him something rare, a moment of truth, a chance to face the past with kindness. He knew he would remember that night for the rest of his life. Not as a moment of sadness, but as a moment of light. Back in his room, Lucas sat by the window and looked out at the rooftops of Verona. The stars were still shining. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he felt ready for it. The dance was over, but the story was complete. He had loved, he had lost, and he had learned. And now, he was free. Chapter 7. Light. 1 year had passed since the night of the ball. Lucas Bennett had returned to London and continued his work as an architect. His days were filled with meetings, drawings, and quiet walks through old buildings. He lived alone in a small apartment near the river, surrounded by books, sketches, and memories. Life had returned to its usual rhythm, but something inside him had changed. He no longer carried the same weight. The silence that used to follow him felt softer now. He had not seen Alice since that night, and he hadn't tried to reach her. He respected the space between them. It was not empty, it was full of meaning. The dance they had shared had closed a door gently, without pain. One morning, As Lucas sat at his desk reviewing plans for a new museum project, he noticed a small envelope among his mail. It had no return address, only his name written in familiar handwriting. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Alice on a stage, dressed in a flowing costume, her arms lifted in motion, her face bright with joy. She was smiling, not the quiet smile he remembered, but a full, open smile that reached her eyes. Behind her, the stage lights glowed softly, and the audience was blurred in the background. On the back of the photo, there was a short message: "Thank you for the last dance. I'm free." Lucas held the photo for a long time. He placed it on his desk, next to a small sculpture he had made years ago. He looked at it and felt something shift inside him. It was not sadness. It was light. He understood now that their story had not ended in pain. It had ended in peace. The dance had been their farewell, and in that farewell, there had been love. Not the kind that holds on, but the kind that lets go. Alice had found her way forward, and so had he. They had faced the past together, not with anger, but with grace. And now, they were both free. Lucas stood by the window and watched the morning light touch the rooftops. The city was waking up, and so was he. He didn't know where Alice was now, or what her days looked like. But he knew she was dancing again, and that was enough. He felt grateful, for the memories, for the silence, for the final dance. It had taught him something important. That love doesn't always stay the same. Sometimes it changes shape. Sometimes it becomes something quiet and strong. Saying goodbye had not been a loss. It had been a gift. A path to freedom, acceptance, and light within. He returned to his desk and began to draw. His hand moved with ease, his mind clear. The photo stayed beside him, a reminder of what had been and what had grown from it. Lucas didn't need more words. The dance had spoken. And now, he was ready to build again, not just buildings, but moments. Moments filled with light. Moral: sometimes love doesn't end. It simply changes shape. Saying goodbye isn't always a loss. It can be a path to freedom, acceptance, and light within. One last dance can speak louder than 1,000 words. Thank you for your attention. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.